images that have dominated the headlines today. On one side, the big ceremony of the state as the official leg of the Donald Trump visit reached the national capital. On the other hand, as you can see, violence continues in several parts of the national capital. 4 more areas under curfew, 10 people at least are dead. All these images playing out on a day when the US president was in the national capital. Shoot at sight orders now have been issued across Northeast Delhi. Let me bring you more on that breaking story. Shoot at sight orders have been issued a short while ago in various areas of Northeast Delhi by the Delhi police. Remember, the Delhi police finds itself under the line of fire as the violence continues at the moment. Milan Sharma is joining me live from Khajuri Khas. Milan, you're in one of the areas where violence has taken place. The Home Ministry insisting the situation under control, but has been now forced to issue shoot at sight orders, clearly suggesting that all is not well on the ground. Tell us what you're seeing. What is the situation on the ground?
Well, Rajdeep, right now also as we stand just very close to the entry area of where the violence has taken place in Khajuri Khas, you can see that police deployment still continues in and around outside this area. Right now, as cars and autos are passing by from the area, there are people who are being checked from here. The police has now also cleared off some areas where the protesters were sitting in Jafrabad. And as we speak, they have issued curfew notices in all these areas like Maujpur, Khajuri Khas, Bagh. Especially during the day, we saw how there was damage to property here. The cars have been torched, cycle rickshaws, auto rickshaws were torched. In fact, we also saw how some buildings near petrol pumps were being torched by the rioters. And looking at this situation, there was a flag march that was taken by the police to the insides of the areas where the rioters had sticks and stones and other weapons in their hands. And after this, Rajdeep, it's towards the evening that the police has issued the curfew orders. There are people that are being let off from this road, but we don't see the kind of traffic that we would see on this road at this point of time, as a lot of areas have been cordoned off by the police.
I want to take you through what Milan has been seeing over the last hour. She's there on ground zero since the morning. Remember, journalists have been targeted. A journalist from a local channel has been shot at. He's in hospital. 2 journalists claim that they've been attacked. Some journalists have been asked to prove their religion and their religious identity. And photojournalists have also found themselves targeted. Milan on the ground tells us now what has been happening. Watch this.
Right now, behind me, you can see a automobile shop that has been torched down by protesters in the area, and you can see these live visuals of how this shop has been torched down by a few people who had gathered here. They were masked, and after they torched the shop down, they moved out of here. And this is the situation right now in East Delhi. The police trying to control it with the fire brigades have reached here, and they are trying to make sure that the fire is doused. But right now I can show you that the fire rages on, and this is not just one such shop that has been torched. In the entire district of East Delhi, many shops and vehicles have been torched down throughout the day. And on the other side, you can see how the crowd is getting unruly, and the police here trying to control the entire situation at this point of time. This is Milan Sharma reporting with the Ashwini Helen for India Today.
As I said, several parts of the city now under curfew. Delhi remains on the boil as fresh instances of arson, pelting and vandalism have been reported in parts of Northeast Delhi. The death toll is up to 10, over 150 people injured, several of them are serious. But as Delhi continues to simmer, the Delhi police finally issuing shoot at sight orders. Let's take a look at all that's happened on day 3 of this violence in the city.
Delhi on the boil. Clashes, arson, stone pelting. Death toll has hit double digits. The number of injured has crossed 150. For a third day, complete lawlessness on the streets of the national capital. The communal clashes that started on Sunday continues unabated without any break. In Gokulpuri, a scrap market next to a petrol pump stands gutted.
As you can see behind me, this is a car which was burnt very recently. Behind me is another car. In fact, let me tell you that I'm standing here in the scrap market which was burned a few hours back. As you can see, the fire tenders have reached the spot, but it will still take them at least another 2 to 3 hours to douse this fire.
It's the same story everywhere.
As you can see, on the other side are people who had a lot of stones in their hands, and we just saw stone pelting take place here in this area, which is Chandbad in Jafrabad.
Khajuri Khas was the worst affected.
People are and should be advised to stay indoors. This is what the Delhi police has said, and they are trying their best to contain any sort of attempts of violence at the hands of people here. But we have seen in a lot of places people are holding sticks in their hands. Some of them have stones in their hands.
The damage is widespread. Shops and street vendors are being targeted, and the police are listless, struggling to restore order.
इस वक्त मैं दुर्गापुरी इलाके में हूँ और यहाँ पर देखिए तो जमकर यहाँ पर तोड़फोड़ हुई है। दिल्ली पुलिस की टीम है वो उपद्रवियों को दौड़ा रही है और इस शख्स को अभी फिलहाल पकड़ा गया है। लेकिन अगर आप ये देखिए तो ये दुकानें देखिए कैसे हिंसा के नाम पर जो दुकानें उन दुकानों में जमकर यहाँ पर तोड़फोड़ की गई है।
The police have appealed to the citizens to maintain calm. It assured that rioters won't be spared.
They should cooperate with us to maintain law and order. If they do anything to violate the peace, then strict legal action would be taken.
While sources tell India Today that the Delhi police has informed the Home Ministry they are short of manpower, top cops deny the report.
कुछ क्वार्टर्स में ये खबर थी कि जो फोर्स है उसकी कमी है, इसको बिल्कुल हम खंडन करते हैं, डिनाई करते हैं. Sufficient force डिप्लॉय की गई है.
Every passing hour is critical for the capital. It can't afford any further escalation. With Milan Sharma, Aishwarya Paliwal and Arvind Ojha in New Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
Let me get a quick comment from two guests who've tracked violence in the national capital in their different forms over the years. Raj Chengappa, editorial director at India Today, joins me. Raj has covered journalism for more than 4 decades. G. Parthasarathy, one of India's senior most diplomats and someone who was in the PMO in that decade of the 1980s where incidents of violence took place repeatedly in different parts of the country. Your first reactions? My sense, if I may ask, is accountability. 3 days of continuous violence. Old-style police officers say you don't have a riot taking place unless the state wants it or the state is incompetent, either complicit or incompetent. What do you see happening, what has gone wrong in Delhi that we've reached this stage of 3 continuous days of violence, Mr. Parthasarathy?
I saw this first in 1948 in partition, when I was an 8-year-old kid. Horror sights with people from across the border going around with talwars.
Now we are seeing them with sticks and stones.
My view is that this is the national capital, the pride of India. At the time of a visit of the most powerful leader in the world, we have disgraced ourselves behind humanity, across the world, by seeing this happen during such a visit, and it's being played all over. Now, somebody has to be held responsible. We have had successful experiments in the past of Supreme Court monitored investigations, and I think everybody, from bottom to top, to the office of the Lieutenant Governor and the portals of the Home Ministry, we should have a judicial inquiry, and those guilty of negligence should be sacked.
You're saying, therefore, an administrative inquiry or a Supreme Court monitoring inquiry that looks at possible administrative incompetence of the LG's office and the Home Ministry.
Yes, and the intelligence agencies. This cannot happen in the capital, disgrace the country. This is what happened in 1984. We can't be repeating this in our national capiple.
That, of course, sir, was a pogrom, directed, targeted violence.
Yeah, but here again, Rajdeep, I'm sorry to be...
each other, houses being burned, property being damaged, people being targeted.
And the inhumanity of it, journalists on duty being asked to strip. Is that the stage?
Yeah, there are reports of journalists being, and I went through this in Gujarat 2002. I was asked to remove my trousers to prove my religious identity. I managed to get out. My driver, and my photojournalist were far more vulnerable because one of them was a Muslim.
I have heard of cases in the national capital. This is enough, whether it is a politician, however high, whether it is whoever in the Lieutenant Governor's office, whoever in the intelligence agencies, and right down the line in the police. If it was getting so bad, why was it not anticipated and the army sent in?
These are questions, Raj, that are going to be asked now because, we were going to discuss the Trump visit in detail. What's happened instead is these images today, particularly on day 2, the official leg, while the US president is in town, not too far away, northeast Delhi simmering. This is an embarrassment. This is the last thing that the Modi government wanted at this moment. Do you agree that some kind of accountability, responsibility will have to be fixed? Because the Home Ministry says it's no coincidence that this has happened. This has happened because the US president is in town. That's not an excuse. For 3 days now, this city is simmering.
Well, we have seen this build-up even before that. If you saw during the elections, there was a lot of...
That's right. So you think in a way this is the fallout of what has happened, the kind of hate-mongering during the elections?
Well, yeah, I think we should have kept it down at that particular point. But let's get to what needs to be done now.
Yes.
Before we get to accountability and everything else. There is a situation. 10 people have died. 135 people injured. Parts of northeast Delhi is a shoot-and-sight order. This hasn't happened in the capital. The last time one recalls any of this kind has been, when, 20 years, 30 years back?
Yeah, there have been minor riots in places like Seelampur,
Correct.
But this kind of concentrated violence for 3 days hasn't happened in almost 40 years, since 84.
So I think the first job is to restore law and order in those places, assure people in that, firstly, the mob shouldn't take control of everything that's happening there. People are frightened. Our own colleagues are talking about who live in that particular area of people being targeted for whichever community. I'm not going into the details of that. So the first thing that needs to be done is to restore law and order. The state must take control. It cannot allow the situation to go beyond that. And that is what we need to do immediately and ensure that there is a modicum of peace restored immediately in the capital, particularly those parts of it, before we start looking into the other issue. Of course, we must look at accountability. We must look at all those things. But the top priority right now is to bring that particular region and that particular area back to normal, or at least restore peace and assure the people around them that, and of course, ensure that it doesn't spread.
Asked, the shoot-at-sight orders could have been done 24 hours earlier. There is another view that because the US president was in town, the police was reluctant to issue shoot-and-sight orders because that would perhaps suggest the situation is far more graver. They wanted to control or contain or send out the message that all is well. Every time that the police had been asked, till about 6 p.m. today, they said all is well, Raj. At 8 p.m. they've issued shoot-and-sight orders. To that extent, do you believe that the police will have to answer some questions?
They would certainly have to, but as I said, the time now is to do two things. One is bring restore peace and normalcy back in that, ensure that these incidents don't blow up. And second is to prevent it from spreading. So I think you need to be very, very careful at the moment, not to sort of, allow this situation to get out of hand. It shouldn't move to other parts of Delhi, the highly sensitive parts that are there. Right now, I think a show of force, ensure that people feel safe in their homes over there, and prevent mobs from gathering, and ensure that we get law and order back.
One more point, you were there in the 80s when we saw that was the decade of riot after riot. Yes. Have we learnt our lessons? I mean, do you believe when police officers, my late grandfather was a police officer, he kept telling me, he was a Gujarat officer, Maharashtra, then Gujarat, he kept saying no riot occurs without incompetence or complicity. Have we learned the lessons from the past?
No.
Is this an old style riot in the so-called New India?
No, you see, look at 84. You have not found one person complicit tried, for God's sake. That was a massacre. This cannot be happening in the national capital.
But sir, the hate-mongering, what Raj spoke about, the speeches that were made during the election, India versus Pakistan, let them have biryani. Then you've got the Shaheen Bagh protesters being, in a sense, demonized. It all seemed to be building up.
I don't want to go into the politics of it. I'm going into the situation.
Yes.
The situation is, as Raj says, first bring it under control. If the police can't do the job, call in the armed forces. You've got a huge number of operational formations right in the capital.
You believe that should be seriously considered?
If the police can't manage, that's the last.
So another 24 hours, if the police can't control it, bring in the army.
That's always a last resort, because but the point is that has to be done first. Secondly, let's not have the sort of cover-ups that we had in '84. Let's have an honest. The Supreme Court set an example some time ago. There's already a Supreme Court inquiry which they have appointed interlocutors and so on and so forth. But have it done seriously. An independent investigation team, Supreme Court monitored with people of the highest integrity. But this cannot happen in the national capital, should not happen.
You know, this of course has shadowed the Donald Trump visit. And it was a question that Donald Trump, the US president, was asked at a press conference that he held. Yes, the US president held one, the Indian Prime Minister doesn't, but the US president did. He was asked the question on the Citizenship Amendment Act and the violence in Delhi. Listen in to President Trump's response.
I will say that the Prime Minister was incredible on what he told me. He wants people to have religious freedom, and very strongly, and he said that in India they have worked very hard to have great and open religious freedom. And if you look back and look at what's going on relative to other places especially, but they have really worked hard on religious freedom. And he talked about it. We talked about it for a long time. And I really believe that's what he wants. As far as the individual attack, I heard about it, but I didn't discuss that with him. That's up to India.
So it appears that the US president very carefully saying that the individual attacks, the violence is India's internal issue. He didn't discuss the Citizenship Amendment Act, which many believe has been a trigger for the street protests and then the violence now, unfortunately, that has ensued. I'm joined by two American voices just to get a sense of how this plays out in the American mindset. Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director, Asia Program and South Asia, joins me. Appreciate, Michael, you're joining me. Also, Richard Russo, Senior Advisor and holds the Wadhwani Chair in the US on Indian policy. Thanks both. Michael, let me come to you. Your sense, you know, we in India, in newsrooms were conflicted today. There was all the focus on the Trump visit till this morning. The violence, though on the streets, escalated. It'll perhaps be reported globally, but does it in any way shadow the Trump visit? Do you believe that the optics, which were so good yesterday, are rather terrible today, rather awful, the images that are coming in from the street?
Well, no, absolutely. I do fear that what had been a very successful visit by President Trump has now been overshadowed by these horrifying visuals on the streets of Delhi. And someone yesterday asked me if I thought that the violence was starting to overshadow the visit. And yesterday I didn't think so. As you know, I think all the focus was on Trump in Gujarat and going to visit the Taj Mahal. The optics were wonderful. But then once Trump himself came to New Delhi, and once he was only 10 miles or so away from where all this violence was happening, that's when, in my view, it became impossible to ignore what was happening, just in a different neighborhood from where he was in. I think, you made a good point that in his press conference today, President Trump really deflected the questions about the citizenship law and about the violent protests. You could argue maybe it was the right thing to do, the practical thing to do, given that he wanted to maintain a positive focus to this visit. He didn't want to have any awkward moments. But, we hear so often about how shared values and shared democratic values are meant to be a pillar of the U.S.-India relationship. And if that's true, then one would think that, at least in a private setting, President Trump should bring up concern about the citizenship law and the violent protests. But, I think at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, and particularly with the Trump administration, which is really not focused on human rights issues in a big way, the shared interests count a lot more than the shared values in the relationship, which I think is another reason why President Trump did not want to go there. And of course, also there's the fact that President Trump himself has been accused of having views and carrying out policies here in the U.S. that are discriminatory, that violate, that go against religious norms in terms of discrimination against Muslims and the like. So naturally, if President Trump is to voice concerns about the citizenship law in India and the like, he could be accused of being a hypocrite. But certainly what's happening in the streets now is very troubling, and I think at a moment like this, what you really want to see is messages, strong messages, calling for calm and unity from the very top. And that's where I think Prime Minister Modi's silence is deafening and telling. And you know, one would hope and expect that there could be some type of message coming from the very top, but I think we're still waiting.
I'll come to you, Richard, in a moment, but Raj, respond to what you just heard. The Prime Minister's silence. The Home Minister seemingly missing in action. Yesterday when it started off, he was in Motera, where, you know, he's also, of course, the representative from Gandhinagar. Perhaps he didn't anticipate the scale of violence, but he was away, eventually takes meetings. So Amit Shah seemingly caught napping, the Prime Minister silent, sending out all the wrong messages at the moment.
Rajdeep, I mean, I was while I was listening to our American panelists,
yes.
I was recalling that and Pata Sati Saab would know this, in 2000, when President Clinton made his visit to India, yes, there was the Chittor Singhpura massacre.
That's right, the Chittor Singhpura massacre in Kashmir.
Of 35 Sikhs.
And today a Home Ministry, or yesterday a Home Ministry official almost referred to it, suggesting it's not a coincidence. The violence is taking place in a way because the US President is in town.
Well, I don't know. I mean, these are speculations, and I'm not getting into that issue. But clearly, I mean, at that time, there was an overreaction, if I recall, from Madeleine Albright.
Yes.
And there was some criticism about the way she phrased all that thing. So I think President Trump was correct in the sense that he didn't get into what he saw as an internal issue of India. And I'm sure the Prime Minister will probably come out with a statement if he doesn't.
Should he have come out with a statement, do you think, earlier? Would it then have seemingly suggested that, you know, the focus would have then got deflected off the President's visit? So the Prime Minister was obsessed in getting the optics right with President Trump, and therefore has consciously decided, I will not speak on the violence.
I don't think, you know, if you look, I think the first instance is the state, whoever's in charge
yes.
of the state to respond to violence. That's the first count that is there. Then you follow it up with the Home Minister, and then finally, I mean, if you see the track record of the way violent incidents in this country have been handled, it's moved in that direction.
But Raj, the Delhi police is under the Home Minister. He can't escape responsibility.
Hasn't he come out with a statement, if I saw on that he's, you know, called for a meeting? And
he's called for a meeting. Very, very, you know, there is no statement calling for peace, harmony, you know, asking people to come together. This is the same Home Minister who last week said, yes, the hate speeches during the election campaign were avoidable. But one of his own members, Kapil Mishra, was out on the street giving those hate speeches.
Well, I thought he said, from what I understood,
yes,
was that they were studying the situation to see what was the problem that had caused it, and then wanted to take a call on, you know, how it should be dealt with. Whether that violence, you know, the continuing violence, clearly, as I said earlier, first needs to be sorted out immediately. And a word from the government would help in terms of calming temperatures across
let me bring in Richard Russo. You know, Richard, we are discussing, as I said, we would have liked to discuss the deals that have been struck, the fact that a major defense deal has been struck between the two sides, the relationship between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. Instead, we are talking about violence, old-fashioned communal violence, 10 people dead, including a police officer. Does this in any way, according to you, cast a shadow on the visit? Or, as President Trump suggested, this is India's internal matter, it doesn't affect the broader US-India engagement in any way at all?
Well, I think the administration, as we saw by taking the visit, even when we saw protests and domestic concerns, I think the administration will continue along the path they've done before, trying to get the trade deal, securing more defense agreements and such. Where you're going to see the longer-term impact and the U.S. and the treatment of India, I think, comes from a couple of other corners. I think international media, I think U.S. media looks at this, and they're very concerned that the United States is not putting human rights issues quite on par with other areas. You've seen some of the other presidential candidates, for instance, mentioning similar things on the campaign trail in the last day or so. And then second, it's in Congress. Now, generally day to day, the Senate and House of Representatives don't have a lot of direct engagement or oversight over major programs we're working with on India. But there are a few. Congress has been very forward-leaning. in terms of securing a higher level of defense cooperation with India. And in fact, if we're going to avoid potential sanctions against India for the acquisition of this Russian-made S-400 missile defense system, very concerned about some of the domestic social issues and religious tensions that are happening there. So I think the administration would still want to continue along the pathways we saw during the trip. But in terms of Congress and other corners of the United States, that's where I think the impact of these domestic tensions is really going to play a part.
You know, we're also getting, meanwhile, breaking news that's coming in at the moment. Because of the Delhi violence, the CBSE has postponed exams in Northeast Delhi tomorrow. Class 10 exams and Class 12 exams have been postponed. 2 Class 10 exams, 3 Class 12 exams. So clearly, average citizens now going to suffer as a result of the violence. And this is not the first time that happens. Yes.
My grandson.
Your grandson is got what, 10th or 12th?
10th.
You know, it comes back to it. Ordinary citizens suddenly find themselves in the crossfire. Lumpen elements take over. I'm just going to play a timeline of, you know, how this has played out. Because remember, this started on Sunday, the day before Donald Trump came to came to India. It's been playing out and then intensifying over the last 48 hours. We thought that the situation would come under control yesterday. It hasn't. But CBSE now has postponed the exams in Northeast Delhi centers tomorrow.
May I intervene?
Yes.
One little thing? I don't like the idea of foreign powers intervening in our internal.
So you think the president did the right thing by staying
I think
away?
the president did the right thing. I think the Prime Minister did his duty as Prime Minister with the leader of the most powerful country.
No, but should the Prime Minister not come out with a strong statement?
Let us wait.
On the violence? Should Amit Shah not come out? He's the Home Minister?
Home Minister is a different matter.
Home Minister?
Prime Minister is dealing with it, but I think in the presence of a foreign
You've got to be a little more careful.
You be more careful. So I'm not willing to be judgmental on that.
Okay.
Because the visit was too important and it went off well.
Okay.
Hello everyone. This is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.